This is A Story of Sorts, the podcast mostly about bookish stuff. And I am your host, Karina Pereira. Hello everyone! On this episode, I chat with Carly Heath about her young adult historical fiction novel, The Reckless Kind, about disability and queer representation in books, and her experience being a mentor for Pitch Wars. Have a listen. Carly, welcome to A Story of Sorts.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
My name is Carly Heath, and I'm an author and teacher and animal lover. And I have my new book, The Reckless Kind, is a young adult novel coming out for me at the time of this interview. It's coming out tomorrow. Yay. I know when the interview airs, it'll probably be in the past,
yes.
But I am really excited that the book is coming out tomorrow. It's about three misfit teens in 1904 Scandinavia, and a fictional Scandinavian country, and they defy the expectations of their rural Scandinavian village in every possible way. They leave their homes, they leave their families, and they live in a little cottage above town in the mountains, and they have to train a wild horse for the village's annual winter horse race.
You know what that reminded me of? A Knight's Tale.
Oh, the movie?
Yeah, because they kind of like, it's this complete group of, like, in a sense, misfits for that society, yes. And they all just go for a race, and that was just so, it just gave me like flashbacks to the movie.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I loved A Knight's Tale. I remember loving that movie when that came out, like with Heath Ledger. He's great.
Talk to us a little bit about your writing journey. How has that been?
Yeah, I started the book. I think I finished the first draft in 2014, and but I had been really thinking about the book for so long, and it really grew from even thoughts I had in middle school and high school. I love little Norwegian fjord ponies, which are these little, very round, kind of thick, butterscotch colored horses that live in Norway. And they're like my favorite breed of horse. And so I've always wanted to write something that had Norwegian fjord ponies in it. And I had some like imagery of scenes from the book for a really long time. Like, I broke my arm when I was 13. And so that kind of is in the book, like the breaking of the arm. In the olden days, though, you know, if you broke your arm in the way that like I broke my arm, it would be amputated. But of course, due to modern medicine, things, they can set things and plate things and everything, then it continues to be a functioning arm. So yeah, I was kind of thinking a lot about like, what would it be like to be injured in the early 1900s when modern medicine isn't what it is. And Gunnar, who's one of the main characters, he of course breaks his arm in a horse accident, and he has to have his arm amputated. So that's kind of the trigger, the start of the book. And yeah, so the book really kind of started from a lot of these random ideas that I was thinking about in middle school and high school. And then in 2014, I finished the first draft of the book. And then I knew it wasn't there yet. It was a book, but it needed a lot of revising. So I spent really a full year after that just revising, and the book that it became after revisions was completely different than the book that I originally wrote. And in 2015, at the end of 2015, I sent out a few queries to agents, which is, querying is what you do in order to get an agent who will then sell your book. And right away, I got a nice full request, but I knew my book probably wasn't 100% yet. So I decided to wait until I got feedback from that agent. And so I didn't query at all. And I was correct in my assumption that the agent replied back and gave me really, really good feedback. And I made revisions based on that feedback. And then also in 2016, Pitch Wars was coming around. And Pitch Wars is a competition where you submit your manuscript. And if you're lucky, you get chosen by a mentor. And then they guide you through the revision process. and then you participate in an agent showcase in February. I met a lot of really awesome authors while preparing for Pitch Wars, and we swapped each other's manuscripts. So I got a lot of feedback during that process. I didn't get accepted to Pitch Wars, and I didn't get accepted for Author Mentor Match, which happened after that. But an agent I had queried previously reached out expressing interest in the manuscript, and I signed with that agent. And in 2017, went on sub, which is the process of the agent sending the manuscript out to publishers for a year. And then the manuscript didn't get sold, and that agent left the business. And I had heard from a lot of people that that meant my manuscript was dead and had no chance, and I should move on to the next thing. But I queried anyway to try and get a new agent. And luckily, I got a new agent about a month after I began querying. And I went on sub with that agent, and that agent was able to sell the book. And the book got sold in 2019. But now it's coming out in 2021, because as we found out, the whole publishing process takes, like, the revising and the working with the editor, and then just the timeline of things in Kidlit, it takes so long. So during that whole time, from 2014 to 2021, I was basically revising, and getting so much feedback from agents, from other editors who would say, like, they liked it, but they had feedback, they had suggestions for making things better. And so that whole time, basically now the book that is what it is now is completely different than the first draft I wrote in 2014.
And do you have an idea of when the story started to actually come to you in full? Like, because you say you had all these ideas, but did you always want to write a book since you were like a child or a teenager, or?
Yeah, well, when I was a teenager and going into college, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I went to school for film. But I found out that, you have this idea of a story in your head, and I wrote screenplays, and I even made some films. But when you make a film, like, so much depends on things that are out of your control, like the other people that work for you and the money that you're able to get. And with a book, though, you can spend years and years and years on this thing that you have complete control over. And what you then make is a reflection of exactly what's in your head,
Yeah.
And but so a film really isn't your own creation. It's just kind of what gets created by a group of people in a way. So I really found that filmmaking was my original dream, but novel writing is much more what appeals to me because of the ability to have complete control over it. And so I guess kind of after going through, probably in 2012, this idea that, like, I probably wasn't going to pursue film anymore. I was doing a lot of drawing and sketching, and I remember really back in 2008, I was sketching characters from this book. And then in really, like, 2012, 2013, I kind of started, like, just writing down little ideas on note cards. I remember I had this board of just ideas, and I would put, like, little Post-it notes on the board with, like, scene ideas. And so then it started to develop, and and then I was training horses, and after I got done, and while I was training horses, I had a lot of ideas that after I got done, I would just start writing them down. And yeah, that's kind of how the book started.
That's really fun, because usually people have, like, you're saying that it went as far back as 2008. And then, like, basically the book kind of grew up with you, and the ideas of the book changed as probably you also changed. And
definitely. I think, like, I feel like the book, it, like, was there, and I was just seeing little pieces of it, really as far back as, like, 2008. seeing little pieces of it, and then it took all the way until 2021 for it to become fully formed in its like finished version of what it wanted to be.
Was it there a point in which you actually sat down to write it and being like, okay, I'm going to make a manuscript out of it now?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of like when the exact date was. I think it was sometime in 2000. I remember in 2013, I did write like the first line of the book. That wasn't actually the first line as it's in the book now, but I wrote the beginning, the scene where Gunnar gets injured. Like I wrote the first line from that, and I was like, it's going to be something like this.
And now
then I gonna kind of put it aside. And then I think I really sat down in earnest in 2014, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna try and make this happen. And that first draft, like I said, it's completely different from what is the finished product. It had like one chapter that was written in third person, and then it went into like this whole second part that was all Asta's point of view. And then it went into the last part, which was all Erland's point of view. And then really in 2014, I worked on like doing alternate point of views between Asta and Erland. So it's been through a lot of different versions.
A lot of work as well. Like rewriting is it's a lot.
Yeah, it never really felt like work. It always felt like a sculpture that you're just kind of like you know what it's gonna be, but you have to like work on slowly adding things, cutting things away, and like building it towards what it wants to be.
The book is set in Scandinavia in 1904, as you said. Why did you choose this specific place and period? Was all just because of the horses?
Yeah, the horses were a big part of it. I've really, ever since I was a kid, like I've always been really interested in Scandinavia and Norway, like especially Norway. I've always thought it was like the most amazing, beautiful country. And it was really fun to research. Now that Google Books is such a thing, you can go on Google Books and you can search for things like Norwegian guidebooks in the 1800s, you know. And I was all from college, I had done a costume design project for Much Ado About Nothing, set in the early 1900s. So just for that college project, I had done a lot of research into the time period. And so I was pretty familiar with it. And I also like the time period as a sort of transitional period from horses to motor cars. And it was a period where still most people were using horses as transportation. But there were a few people who had motor cars, mostly for recreational purposes, because you certainly couldn't, especially in Norway or Scandinavia, you couldn't go long distances in a motor car because everything would be snowed in. And I love the old timey motoring journals. They have these awesome quotes and things that say things like, oh, motor cars are a lot of fun, but they're probably not going to be the main mode of transportation anytime in the future, just because how will people get around when there's snow? Like how will that work? Like people are always going to need horses when it's snowing. And so it's really interesting to get into that mindset.
In hindsight as well, like knowing what you know now and how things are now.
Yeah, exactly. And it created some nice tension between the two brothers, where Fred is very into horses and Gunnar is very into motor cars. So I like that tension as well. And yeah, so I like the time period. I was really into Scandinavia, and a book that really helped me kind of also just get started jumping into the manuscript was I read Kristin Lavransdatter by Sigrid Undset, which was the book that helped Sigrid Undset win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And that book was really inspiring to me, like the setting and the characters. And what I didn't like about Kristen Lavransdatter is the message, which is basically if you defy your parents, you will suffer. So
seriously?
Yeah, like that's the message.
Terrible.
I know.
Especially because like, yeah, in your book there's found family, right? It's like one of the bases of the book is found family. So that is, yeah, I can understand now.
Yeah. So I kind of like, there's so many things I love about Kristen Lavransdatter, like the setting and the characters, and I loved all of that, but I hated the message. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to kind of take the setting and the passion of Kristen Lavransdatter, but like make it a more feminist.
Yeah.
And I also read Sigrid Undset's, she wrote this just little book called Happy Times in Norway, which gives a lot of flavor and texture of like Norway in the early 1900s. And it also features a Christmas race, which was very common in the 1800s and early 1900s in places where it's winter, where people would get their ponies and they would hitch them to sleighs and have races. And in fact, there's this whole genre of art that features sleigh races and also disastrous sleigh races, because I can imagine as a horse person that having a bunch of people who are maybe a little tipsy on glug and maybe don't get their ponies out all that often, deciding to have a race on Christmas Day,
like on the
snow. So yeah, there's all these paintings from the 19th century that show sleighs like crashing and being tipped over, and horses like running away and people going so that the Christmas race in Happy Times in Norway also kind of inspired the Christmas race in the book. Of course, the Christmas race in in Happy Times in Norway is just very simple. This is what we do. We have this little race, and it was very bland. But I could picture all the things that could go wrong with that,
and then kind of translate it into your own story.
Yes.
In this book, there is a queer and disabled representation. Tell us a little bit about that. Was it always the case that you always wanted to include this, or as the book changed, did those ideas come to mind?
Yeah, that was pretty like an early decision when I was originally thinking of the story, because like just in my life, like if I look around my group of friends, there's a whole bunch of diversity, and just in myself, like I have multiple disabilities. Like I'm hard of hearing, I have broken hand, I have a broken spine, I have post-concussion syndrome. But like when you look at books and media, like you rarely see disabled representation, which is bizarre, because like I would say you're supposed to say, like, I think it's like 1 in 4 people are disabled. But I maybe it's just my friends, because I hang out with horse friends, but I think it's like 9 in 10. like it seems like I can't even really think of someone who, in my circle of friends, who isn't disabled in some way. So yeah, I'm like, when I'm writing something, I'm going to have like disabled representation, and I'm going to have queer representation, because queer people have always been around and disabled people have always been around, and probably even more so in historical settings because of, just the lack of medicine back then. So if someone broke something, it was probably going to get amputated. And so those were kind of the thoughts in my head, and probably the thoughts that I will continue to explore as I write everything, because I want to reflect the world as it really is, and the world as it really is really diverse.
Yeah, because like I always like to talk with authors when they include diversity in some way, like when it's not the same old stories, straight cis white people. And of course it's always kind of like a silly question. Even as I make it, I kind of want to start a conversation, because I also think it's important. But when you ask, why did you decide to include queer people or disabled people, it's like, why not? Obviously. But it's also like but like, how do I start talking about this without making this silly question of
Yeah.
why would you like to introduce this representation in the book when it's obvious why we should want to do that.
Yeah, the real question is, why haven't they been? Why hasn't this representation been in books and media until like really just now? And the question really should be like, why did you decide to make all the characters in a book abled? Like that? It would be really interesting if more authors got that question. Like,
we are
why is there no disability in your book?
Exactly. But we are so used to, to like being the mainstream without diversity, that when finally, luckily, publishers start publishing books with diversity, you kind of feel like, I have to bring this to the conversation because I want to talk about it, because I do think it's important. But it is like, what kind of question is this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, well, how am I gonna talk about it without making it a question like that? When it's such an obvious thing, and it's so good that people nowadays are actually making those changes and like either its own voices or not, and they are contributing to us having so much diversity in stories. Because like I host a book club, and sometimes it is so complicated to find books with disabled representation, because I always try to, it's basically a book club where we talk about social justice and other matters like that. And you really have to dig deep, especially to find in adult themes, because young adults, there's more, because obviously there's usually a moral in young adult books. But even for adults, it's sometimes very difficult to find certain representation with books that most adults would like to read, because I really like young adults, but some adults don't. So
I wonder why it has been like, why has disability erasure happened and queer erasure? And I think it has to do with this idea of like a taboo, like it's almost taboo in society to acknowledge that people are disabled. And there's like I'm just thinking from an early age of like children being like, oh, don't acknowledge or pay attention to that person's disability. Or you see someone with like a visual disability and you're like, oh, you're not supposed to notice that, and so it makes this mind's idea in our head that, oh, everyone must be abled, and then if you're disabled in some way, you're like an aberration, you're different. And also maybe might be like a capitalist thing too, because in order for capitalism to succeed, they want everyone to be a worker, like a functioning
super
worker.
Productive.
Like
in a specific way, because you can be productive in many ways, of course, but a very specific way.
And like even me, when I'm applying for a job, I do have lots of disabilities, but I always checked not disabled, because I don't want it to count against me. And I definitely don't like say anything about it. And I think that's also because of the taboo thing. Like I don't I'm like, anytime I mention like, oh, I'm hard of hearing and I'm not wearing my hearing aids right now, so I'm kind of having a hard time understanding what's going on. Like there's a little bit of awkwardness there. So I think maybe what we need to do is just make things a little bit more like less taboo, just acknowledging that people are disabled and that probably most everyone is disabled in some way, and just normalize it.
But also like a book doesn't necessarily, because I do have a feeling that the books that, not now maybe, but a few years back, if you had a book with disabled representation, the disability was the main focus of the book. So you talk about this person who, for example, is in a wheelchair, and the whatever difficulties they have dealing with that situation. And instead of just being a person that happens to be in a wheelchair and, for example, is in a romance.
Yes.
So the disability is not what's defining the story. It's just it's just, it's there because it exists, of course. And I think it's really cool that nowadays people are changing that as well. You just have certain representation, not focusing on the representation, but because, those people exist and like they're everywhere around us.
And I am thinking I did do remember getting like a little bit of pushback, sometimes occasionally from people who are reading early drafts of the book. They would say things like, is it necessary to make Asta hard of hearing because it doesn't impact the plot at all? And it's like weird that like someone's identity would have to impact the plot, like just the way she is. It doesn't impact the plot. It's just
or that the disability has to be the person's personality, and it's not that.
And I think like the whole capitalist paradigm is also like, oh, you have to overcome your disability. So there's a lot of books like where someone either is like, you know, the term is super crip, like they overcome their disability and it's supposed to be inspirational, or they decide that they're a burden and then they kill themselves, which is awful, which is like not a good, but that has been something that is seen in books, and really like all the way back into the 1900s. There's that theme of like people, disabled people dying by suicide because they don't want to be a burden to their family members. And that's really problematic as well, and that says something about I think our society, that those sorts of stories were just going out there without question, like, oh yeah, that's a
sure, it makes sense. I know. But it is a bit, I do think, and it kind of brings me back to something a bit different, I guess, but which is A Little Life, the book A Little Life. I read that book a few years ago, and I loved it the first time around, but I did come out of the book kind of thinking, who wrote it? Did this person kind of go through the same things? Because in a sense, I think what makes the book so good is that it is so sad. And it kind of feels like we are romanticizing the sadness of all the abuse the main character went through.
I must confess, I only read like I want to say like 25% of it. I thought the writing was amazing.
Yes,
like the way it was written. I have to finish the book sometime in order to like,
it's 700 pages long.
in order to apply commentary. But what I did read, I was like, oh wow, all these characters are so like fully drawn and vivid. And so I'm going to have to finish the rest of it and figure out like if I have a thought or perspective on it. Because it seems like I know some people have criticized the author, but the author is also kind of private. So I'm kind of like, well, who's to start asking about that author's identity and their experience? Because that author wants to be like really private. And if, I don't know, if the book like feels real and the book is touching people, I think that's valid. But like I said, I need to read the book before I provide commentary on it.
But it kind of reminded me of that, because I think it's something that I've been thinking more about in the last few months, especially because like the author came with there's a new book out and stuff, and it really made me think about that, about like there was a lot of talk, for example, about John Green writing The Fault in Our Stars with, you know, there's two people who suffer from cancer, and people saying, okay, but is this romanticizing cancer? Is this romanticizing disease? He did work at the hospital with patients. It's based on someone that he knew, etc. But it does sometimes make you think when you come out of a book and you kind of wonder, the most beautiful thing about this book is how sad it is.
Well, I really liked A Fault in Our Stars.
Me too. I loved it. I mean,
I liked how he's really good at like making characters that feel like really real, and he's really good at like the perspective. There's like a lot of humor in the book. The book is really funny, and I think that's like a really important perspective, because it's not all sad. It's it's a very funny book, and it's very like the way the characters kind of cope with their conditions is it feels very authentic, and I think people like ask John Green, oh, is this based on real life and everything? And I'm like, well, it kind of feels like it is.
Yeah, but then you'll find out that he worked in. I really like him. Like I read the Anthropocene Review, and that man had me crying about ridiculous things, even football that I don't care about. But that's why I'm saying, like, a lot of people did mention, like, how did he write this, and what kind of things is he trying to achieve with this. But again, he did work with cancer patients, and he did work at hospital. So, but sometimes kind of measure a book, like I said, like A Little Life and all the things that happen in that book, and it makes me think a little bit, like, why do I find it so good, and do I just enjoy the suffering? Like, am I here just to feel sorry for that person? I
think there's more to it than just the suffering. Like, it makes you think. And I think there's a lot of books that are very like that touch people. And I think if the book is touching people and and making them feel something and making them like really think, and it's not harmful, I think that's good. And maybe some books are not for everyone too. Like, and that's why I also think trigger warnings and content warnings are important, so that people who might, because I've actually been there where I have read things and I'm like, I wish I did not read that, because now I'm going to have to, that triggered my trauma in a way that I didn't need to, and now I can't unthink the thoughts I had while I was reading that. So I'm a big fan of content warnings and trigger warnings, and I'm also a big fan, I guess, of not gatekeeping books and not book shaming people. Like, if someone likes a book and like other people, like, that book didn't work for them, like, I'm not a fan of people going like, oh, you like that book?
Elitism and snobbery.
The elitism,
please do not do that. And I know we all have a tendency to be snobs sometimes, like to kind of, oh, you read that. So, and it takes a long time to kind of lose that and to not react to your first instinct, which is, oh, you read that because that's bad literature or whatever. But I do, like, I've spoken with other people on this podcast about it. I have no patience for people like making fun of Instagrammers and just like, people are just being happy. So let them be. Let them read whatever they want, right?
Let the people enjoy the things. I do believe in reading critically, though, and
definitely,
and examining power structures and thinking about things like is this book upholding white supremacy? Is this book failing to interrogate issues of representation? Is this book like creating harmful tropes or that sort of thing? I think is important to think about. But I admit there are books that I read and I'm like, the way the story is told is really engaging, and the characters are really engaging, and the author is problematic and some of the themes in the book are problematic, but I identify what is done well in the book, and I identify that this book touched me in a certain way. And maybe I'm not going to be loud on Twitter, like proclaiming this author is the best author and this book is the best book. And, I will challenge anyone who says otherwise. Like, okay, like I believe in nuance, and I believe in like, okay, you feel free to like the thing that you like. I encourage everyone to think critically about what they're liking and what they're reading. But I don't think anyone should be shamed for liking something.
No, I do think that there's I think a work to be done from both sides. Like the reader has to accept that a book is problematic, and the people on the other side have to accept that you may enjoy something that's problematic. I've spoken about like Twilight, for example. I know Stephanie Meyer is problematic. I know the book has, especially the new one, is like the that I didn't even finish, but the book has a lot of problematic issues there. Did I still enjoy them? hell yeah, like I still enjoy them. I still take fun in like take joy from remembering the joys that the book brought me when I first read it. But that's it. Like enjoy whatever you like as long as you keep a critic eye on it. And if people do tell you, listen, just don't support it, like don't go shouting about it everywhere because the author is a shitty person. I think just like be mindful of that, because that's going to hurt people, right? It's
you can think about, okay, like if you really like a problematic author, well, that's great, you can like that person, and maybe like think about, okay, I'm going to work a little extra hard to boost and shout out about the people who are actually doing good work in the areas that, like, that
this person is failing.
Yeah. So like, you might secretly like the Harry Potter books, or you might like the Harry Potter books, but maybe on social media, you do a little extra to boost trans authors and queer authors and get really loud about those. And then, don't go jumping into people's mentions when they start talking about the problematic things about Harry Potter. You be like, okay, yes, I agree, Harry Potter's problematic.
No, definitely. I think you can enjoy something and still know it's cheating.
Like exactly.
Without having to promote it. Definitely. And I think
there's like a cultish thing around fan culture, though. You can definitely see it in certain authors and their followings. Like there's this like, how dare you ever say anything negative about this particular author I like, and I'm going to defend them to the death. And it's like, well, the author that you like is problematic, but just accept that. Just understand that the world is complex.
I find that way of thinking like so weird, because when I find someone that I really like, and I was a very big Harry Potter fan as well, I like, instead most people get defensive. This is my thing, don't attack it. And for me it's like, I'm so sad, but they are absolutely right, and I do not want to support this. So I always get a bit like, it's so weird, and this was like a big part of my life. It's a big part of a lot of people's lives, including the people she is attacking. And it's like, think about them. So and you can kind of think about it too in like a wider system, like you can even think it not just in a fandom, but like in your country, like especially like in America, you might really like living in America, but this country has a whole lot of problems. And I think it's important to acknowledge the problems, and because you can make something better if you acknowledge what the issues are. But if you refuse to acknowledge the issues, like the fact that this country was founded on genocide and slavery, and that it's built up through systematic racism, like it's really, really important that people who live here acknowledge that. But there's whole groups of people who are trying to make us forget that really, really important history, and who are refusing to teach children about that really, really important history. And then how are you ever going to make this country better if you're not learning about its problems? It's curious, because I do feel the same way in relation, I don't know for sure in the Netherlands, but in Portugal as well, in the sense that I do think that some people forget that you can love a country deeply and still see its flaws, and still understand that you can still love a country deeply. Well, a country is not a person, but you know what I mean? Like, just be proud of, being whatever you are, and yet see the flaws and want to change. And a lot of people are like, no, like this country is the best country in the world. And a lot of Portuguese people say that. So we don't, you don't really need to touch on those extreme important issues, which is racism, because Portugal is not racist. So it's like, people think for me to be a patriot means that I have to be blind to those spots, and it really drives me insane. And it's it's what you were saying, like
it's like how will you grow? And it's really, you can even take it to like a personal level. Like you can love yourself, but you also have to acknowledge your imperfections in order to grow and become a better person.
Exactly. So, but
deep thoughts.
So going back going back to the book, well, because of this as well, because like the representation that we are talking about, you worked with a I can never say these words, sensitive readers, right?
Yeah. Yes, I was very much a fan of working with sensitivity readers throughout the process. And so and just like as I was drafting and revising, just at various points, I would come across other people on Twitter, and I saw that they were sensitivity readers. I'm like, oh, great! I'm going to hire you. Can I hire you to read my manuscript and give feedback? And so I got actually a lot of different perspectives, because there's like a lot of different representation in the book. And so anyone who's like, oh, sensitivity readers are ruining the publishing industry, or are making authors change their work, I'm like, no, they make your work better. Like every single time I had feedback from a sensitivity reader, like it helped me make my book more nuanced and more and just richer and better. Like there was never any time I was like, oh darn, I wish I hadn't hired that sensitivity reader and learned about my book in a different perspective. Like everything was like, oh, thank you for this feedback. This is all things that I can do to make my book so much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did call them sensitive readers, but I hope they are not. I hope they are just sensitivity.
Another term that's used is authenticity readers.
Okay, because
because that's also useful, because if you are, let's say you're writing a historical book, I actually didn't have like a historical scholar read my book. That would have been great, but I think anyway, it's my book is kind of like a fantasy. So it's not like but it's like if you would have someone who, okay, I'm thinking of like a crime novel. If you have a crime novel, you're probably going to have like a real person who's involved in law enforcement read it in order to make sure that all of that legal stuff is
accurate,
is real, right?
Yeah.
And so same with like any sort of representation, like disability, or people from ethnic backgrounds that are different than yours, or people who from gender and sexual identity backgrounds that are different from yours. Having someone with that identity read your book and give feedback on it, just 100% all the time, makes your book better.
And would you say that Twitter is a good place to find sensitivity readers?
I just kind of randomly found people on Twitter, just from people who I follow. And I know there's probably a place on the internet where people can search for legit sensitivity readers. I don't know what that is though.
It's okay. I was just kind of trying to figure out, because you just mentioned that you follow them and found them on Twitter. So
yeah,
that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think when Twitter is such a really useful part of writing, because you can follow people who are involved in the type of conversations that you want to have in your work. And so you can learn from other people who are posting about the issues that are interesting and important to you. So like, I follow a lot of disability advocates on Twitter, and just through kind of that osmosis, kind of found out about people who were sensitivity readers, and then just became friends too with people who were like, oh, this person actually would be really great to read your manuscript. And so that's how I connected with different people. And yeah, it just kind of happened. It wasn't like something I was consciously thinking about. Like it was just something that kind of happened as I was in the writing process.
Speaking of Twitter, you mentioned that you're a Pitch Wars mentor. Do you want to talk about it? Like, how did that happen? How did you become a mentor, and what does it entail?
Yeah, so like back in 2016, I didn't get chosen for Pitch Wars, but it was a great learning process. And then sold my book, cut to now 2021, and I still follow the Pitch Wars account. And so I know every year they open up mentor applications, so you can apply to be a mentor. So I applied to be a mentor last year, didn't get in, but applied to be a mentor this year, got in. And it's really great because you then get a bunch of, you make your wish list of the types of manuscripts that you're interested in, and then you get a whole bunch of submissions. And I got over 70 submissions, and I was not, the amount of reading that you have to do is a lot.
Yeah. I can imagine 70 people.
which is great. Yeah, but it's a lot. So if anyone is thinking about being a Pitch Wars mentor, it kind of felt like a full-time job. And doing a Pitch Wars mentorship thing with having a book coming out at the same time was a lot on my plate. And it really gives me a nice perspective on what agents and publishers are experiencing, getting a whole lot of books in, because as a reader, you kind of pick up the book that you like at that moment. But when you have like a stack of 70 books in front of you, basically, and you're like, okay, how do I pick which book I'm going to focus on for the next few months? Mm-hmm. And so I skim the query. I kind of get into a habit of like reading the first page. And if the first page is interesting to me, I'll mark it green. And then if the first page is kind of like, okay, I see this has potential, or I'll maybe mark it yellow. And rarely do I mark anything like, no, this is not there. But there were a few. But what I do is then I go back through the ones that I had green, and I read a little bit more of them. But it's really important to like get in the mental mind space of like, I have to really focus on this book. And if you read like 10 books in a row, it's really hard to like really focus on that book and what it needs. So you have to kind of take breaks and kind of read. I'm going to read like 5 submissions and then like take a break and then like really focus. It's quite a mentally exhausting thing. And also I don't want to be like, passing on something that might have been really good if I just hung with it for 10 or 20 more pages. It's really, it's really a tough process, and I can only imagine what agents go through.
Well, as a mentor in the Pitch Wars, because Pitch Wars, I know from what I understand and from what I've seen on Twitter, is people basically trying to pitch their story to an agent, right? And then if the agent likes the tweet with whatever they said that the story is about, they can message the agent, right?
Okay, that's Pit Mad, which is a little different.
One. Okay, because I've seen both actually.
Yeah,
I was like, they're different things. All right.
Yeah, they're done by the same organization, but Pit Mad is you make a Twitter length pitch of your book, and then agents will like it. And then if agents like it, then you can send them an email with your submission package. And, you can usually people put in the subject heading something like you liked it during Pit Mad or DV Pit, so the agent knows. But it's also perfectly valid to just cold query agents. That's how I got, the agents I had in the past. So it's kind of just a little way to see if someone is really interested. I don't know if what's better, pitching someone on Twitter or cold
just
querying.
Sending. Yeah.
But
what is your job then as a mentor? Like, what exactly do you just give like feedback to the people who want to query after?
So from my 70 manuscripts that I get, I pick one.
Yeah.
And
from 70. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's why it's like really, really stressful.
Oh my God.
It's extremely, extremely stressful to pick one out of that 70. So then I work with that author on polishing up their manuscript to be as best as it can be and polishing up their query letter so it's as best as can be. And then in February, there's an agent showcase. So their query letter and like a sample of their manuscript is put on the Pitch Wars website, and agents can go through and read all of them and then comment, send this to me. And then that is another way that people can get, agent interest, as it were. But many people, like I said, Pitch Wars is just kind of like a fun alternative to querying, and it's great that people can get feedback from their mentor, and but I got my agents through cold querying. I didn't get accepted to Pitch Wars. So if anyone is watching or listening and they didn't get into Pitch Wars, it's totally not even close to being any judgment of your quality of your writing. Like, just cold query and you're gonna find an agent that way.
Very well. And it's also, I think, Pitch Wars and stuff like that on Twitter in general, it's can be a nice way to find like-minded people, because I know people who, for example, they are writers and they were writers all by themselves, but obviously it's difficult sometimes to find the time to write when you don't have someone to kind of go with it and tell you, hey, it's time to write. So they kind of create those groups of writers and they have like a time to write together, etc. So I think Twitter can be a really good place, even Pitch Wars, to kind of get to know other people that are like-minded.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. I think that's the most valuable part of Pitch Wars when I entered and didn't get in, was the friends I made and the feedback I got on my manuscript from other Pitch Wars hopefuls.
I want to ask a question that has nothing to do with your book or your work, and it's the fact that I've read that you were an extra in the Princess Diaries.
Oh yeah, I thought that was the biggest deal when that happened.
It was. I mean, even now I think it is.
Yes. Because I was living in San Francisco at the time, and that was where Princess Diaries was filming. So it was a big deal that they were hiring like people to be like the school children at Mia's school. And so, as you guys know, Princess Diaries by Meg Cabot is like the best book, and the movies are great. And so it was awesome. Like, I thought it was like a big deal to be in. And so I can find myself, when I watch Princess Diaries, I can find myself in maybe like 6 scenes, like in the background. Nice. if you're looking, we're all in school uniforms, and I have like shoulder length black hair with bangs. And I'm like a little bit taller than others. So like, if you look for someone who's kind of tall with black hair and bangs, that's me.
That's gonna be looking out for. I'm going to. People are gonna be like, "What? I never watched the Princess Diaries. I saw a scene here and there. I know more or less what it is about, because I also haven't read the books.
The books are great.
I have not watched the movie, even though I really like Anne Hathaway.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And actually, like at the time that was filmed, like Anne Hathaway was a nobody, and Mandy Moore, was the big deal. And so I remember I was like, oh my God, Mandy Moore! Like, it was like a big deal. But Anne Hathaway was she was really nice. They were all like really, really nice, and it was fun.
So I'm gonna when I watch it, keep an eye out.
Yeah.
What are you working on at the moment? And I don't know, maybe by the time this episode goes out, it is going to be, I don't know, maybe almost finished. But what are you working on this time?
Yeah, I'm revising a YA fantasy that is set on a Scandinavian island. It's also a similar time period, like early 1900s, but this time it has magic. And it's about a family that is cursed to transform into animals at some unknown point in their lives. And so a boy who's like an orphan, who's been taken in by the family and has fallen in love with the only son of the family, sees that his love interest is beginning to transform into a fish. And so he needs to learn sorcery in order to defeat this ancient villain, who is the reason the curse has happened, and so he has to learn sorcery in 5 days in order to save his beloved.
So you basically put there's a lot of fish in the sea.
Oh my gosh, why did I even think of that?
I'm sorry.
I should throw that in somewhere.
Plenty of fish in the sea. I just want that one.
Plenty of fish in the sea.
That sounds super interesting as well, though. Where can people find you online?
On my website, carlyheathauthor.com, and then on Twitter at Carly L. Heath, and Instagram at Carly Lynn Heath. That's Lynn spelled Lyn, and then on TikTok also at Carly Lynn Heath.
Great. I'm going to put everything on the show's notes so it's easier to find.
Thank you.
Now, this is always the last question of the podcast. I always ask for an all-time favorite book and a book you would recommend right now.
All-time favorite book, like it's a tie between Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller. I don't know if I would.
You don't have to.
I don't know if I can pick between the two, like, because they're both really good.
Because everybody wants to kill me when I make these questions, like, how can you, a book lover, actually ask this from people?
I know.
So I gave some, you can choose more than one.
But a book I can recommend right now would be what I'm reading, which is The City Beautiful by Aden Polydoros. Let me turn it this way. It's backwards. This book is amazing. It's set in 1890s in Chicago during the Chicago World's Fair, and it's a little bit scary. It's very I just love it. Really great characters, and I haven't gotten the chance to really focus on it and finish it because everything that's been happening. But I'm really looking forward to finishing it this week, and it's really good.
Very well. Carly, thank you so much for coming to the podcast and for this great interview.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
It's really, really nice talking to you.
You can access today's show's notes via my pod page, which you can find along with all of my social media links at linktree/Carina Pereira. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting A Story of Sorts on Patreon. Patreon is a platform which allows you to contribute monthly to the podcast in exchange for extra content, such as early access to episodes, a shout out at the end of an episode and on Instagram, and choosing a theme for me to talk about on the podcast. You can become a patron at patreon.com/A Story of Sorts. Leaving a review would also be highly appreciated. Don't forget to subscribe to get a notification when the next episode hits. I'll talk to you then, and thank you for listening.